In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm April Giarrusso.
I'm Ruth Zaccaria, not Mark Zaccaria, and I think it's Ladies' Day on Common Sense today. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. It is the season of renewal here in Rhode Island, and all the predictable reappearances are being made. With that as our theme, you can look forward to details on the renewed arrests of elected officials on charges of embezzlement and more. You can also hear how this year's budget season will be a test of will for politicians, since financial reporting has some new rules around this time. You'll also hear about the one job that Governor Raimondo has and that occupies her every waking moment. As usual, this week's show will also feature an in-depth interview conducted by State Representative Patricia Morgan. This week, Pat talks with Johnathan WIlliams from the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, on many topics that are on the radar of ALEC. Between segments of that briefing, look for April and me to drop back in and then ask again our favorite political question, are you kidding me? Closing us out this week, we will hear also from Jeff Richard. He'll let us in on a topic that he's been researching, New England labor statistics. To get us started, though, let's hear some analysis of the stories that affected Rhode Islanders most this week. April?
Thanks, Ruth. Governor Raimondo has hit a landmark in her gubernatorial career. It's not higher approval ratings or anything that's really going to benefit Rhode Island. It's $1 million in fundraising. Your governor, who does not have to face re-election until 2018, has already banked $1 million in fundraising. This past 3 months has accrued $300,000 of that figure. To help better understand Governor Raimondo's tenacious efforts, know that the cap on individual and political action committee contributions means that no donor was allowed to give her more than $1,000. But obviously every little bit adds up. Her contributors range from New York financial investment and consulting firms, Rhode Island homemakers, to even multiple wannabe Rhode Island judges, as the Providence Journal reports. You're all aware that the governor traveled to Silicon Valley for economic development meetings, which turned into a fundraiser, surprisingly enough. You know this because we mentioned it a couple of times. So it appears that the governor's money train isn't slowing down anytime soon. Let me say this for the governor. You should be proud at how hard she is working to build up her campaign fund and potentially bright future in the United States government. It's clear that she's working hard for her money. But as a Rhode Islander, what I would rather see on the front page of the newspapers are stories of how my governor is working hard for her state. Let's not put the cart before the horse, Governor. The best way to get reelected is to work hard for the people of your state, not, push to pass legislation that was unanimously panned by the voting population, or rush a marketing campaign that required you to eat some crow and dole out a hefty severance package to your sacrificial lamb. Sorry for the mixed animal metaphors, but I think you're starting to get what I'm putting down. Money is what makes campaigns run. There's no question about that. But it's obvious that we need to change the culture of politics in this state and challenge each individual running for a political office, regardless of how long they've been in their seat, their political affiliation, or their money. Let's put our due diligence into our research so that when someone is elected, or re-elected, we can say that each of us made the best choice we could at the time, come hell or high water. Ruth?
Thanks, April. It seems that spring has truly sprung. The Providence Journal reported last week that the state's May Revenue Conference has concluded with upbeat news. The economists and income analysts who meet twice a year to place bets on revenue have forecast an extra $47.5 million in the state's coffers to help cover the fiscal year 17 budget. This upsurge was said to come primarily from increases in gambling revenue and more persistence in the collection of income taxes. That's great, but it says nothing about estimates for expenditures. Only the Rhode Island House can speak definitively on that, and they're not talking just yet. Every year, the hopeful press releases are sent out promising a balanced budget. The intimation is that the higher the forecast revenue, which magically appears every spring, is the reason we'll be able to cover all expenses. Later this spring, we'll see the egregiously inflated figures for forecast interest income. Then, if only on paper and just for one brief shining moment, there will be the mirage of a balanced budget. This year, there may be an ugly wrinkle, though. This year, the normal fantasy of the Ocean State budget process may be interrupted by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB. This private organization develops the recognized standards by which all government books must be kept. This year, GASB has promulgated new requirements for recognizing both revenue and expenses. In a word, estimating 15% return on a public investment during a time of generally zero interest rates will now be frowned upon. Worse yet, liabilities already accrued but not yet due will also have to be shown on the balance sheet and therefore the budget. I'm talking to you, other post-benefit employment benefits. So the books of the state, its capital, and all its other municipalities will suddenly look a lot less rosy. Bond ratings will undoubtedly sink. In short, the number of financial magic tricks that eager elected officials will be able to perform will be severely curtailed. That's a good thing for transparency, but then it was always on the voter, only the voters who cared about that. There will be pain and suffering as budgets are passed all around Little Rhodey. The real crunch comes later, though. Now that these extra liabilities will be clearly shown on the books, there'll be far less slush money than anyone has been used to in recent times. There will be real obstacles to pay raises, both those in the pipeline and those about to be negotiated. Staff expansions will be difficult to the point of impossible in all but the most critical instances. All this will test the mettle of our elected officials at all levels of government. Will they be able to adapt to the new environment of scarce resources? I hope so, of course. But recent history doesn't give me much cause for optimism. April?
A member of the Providence City Council was arrested on campaign finance charges, among other things like embezzlement, filing a false document with public officials, unlawful appropriation of funds, violating the Rhode Island contributions and expenditures reporting requirements, and if you're an avid reader of the Providence Journal, he also allegedly stole from children, in a manner of speaking. Following Rep. Gallison's dishonorable lead, City Council Majority Leader Kevin Jackson is the latest in Rhode Island's ongoing list of corrupt politicians, and for some reason, we are still acting shocked. Jackson was arrested by the state police and faced arraignment last Wednesday under the 6th District Court. As it turns out, over his entire electoral career, he garnered a reputation for being a late filer of his campaign finance reports with the Board of Elections. His record is 20 open late filing violations that date back to 2009. He was even cited in 1992 by the State Ethics Commission for failing to file his financial disclosure forms while he was on the city's Recreation Advisory Board, and he has been on the City Council since 1994. Now, Jackson is the longest-serving Providence City Council member of the current 15 there. According to the Providence Journal and the charges filed against Mr. Jackson, we can do some math and see what sort of sentencing he might be faced. For felony unlawful appropriation, he could get up to 20 years in prison and/or a fine of up to $50,000 or 3 times the value appropriated, whichever is higher. For felony embezzlement of the alleged misuses of contributions to the Providence Cobras Youth Track and Field account, he could get up to 20 years in prison and/or a similar fine to the other charge. For filing false document with a public official, he could get up to a year in prison or up to a $1,000 fine. For violating Rhode Island campaign contributions and expenditures reporting requirements, he could get up to a $1,000 fine. So all in all, he could face anywhere between 40 years in prison or over $100,000 worth of fines. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel the need to reference back to my commentary last week on Rep. Gallison and remind the good elected officials of this state to don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Is skimming off the top really worth 40 years of your life? Maybe that's the question we should be asking this election season. Ruth?
Thank you, April. That wraps up our analysis of the news here in Rhode Island for the week. Before we move on to the segment of Pat Morgan's interview, though, we'll detour for an update on everything that's still to come on Common Sense this week. Odds are we'll also take a short break to ask our favorite rhetorical question, are you kidding me? So stay tuned and enjoy the
The House Oversight Committee has a new chairperson who vows that the 38 Studios debacle's days are numbered. That's outstanding. But that doesn't actually mean that we'll get a resolution on the ordeal. Are you kidding me? Representative Patricia Serpa says that she wants to pivot the focus of the committee and not regurgitate any more information about 38 Studios or election lines and voting lines. Stop for a second. Trying to wrap my brain around this one. Maybe if she said she would fast-track the investigation and conclusion and went all Justice League on the 38 Studios deal, I'd feel a little better. But pivot? Does that mean that you're giving up on it? Or trying to push it under the rug so that we stop talking about it? Monique Chartier of the Ocean State Current wonders if Chairwoman Serpa doesn't want to expose the events in Money Trail that put state taxpayers on the hook for the $89 million deal. Well, of course, there have been some modest settlements in the civil cases, so maybe $89 million isn't the exact figure. Let's round it down to a cool $85 million for funsies and rampant speculation. Still, a lot of money that the Oversight Committee is just gonna... What exactly? Attorney General Peter Kilmartin told Go Local Prov that the state police are close to wrapping up the investigation, though he couldn't give us a time frame. That's not what's worrying me. I believe that the state police will do their due diligence for the investigation. It is what the pivoting Oversight Committee and the Attorney General do after the investigation that is now causing me some worry. Chartier wonders if the Attorney General will allow a comprehensive investigation into all of the aspects of the 38 studio deal. She also wonders if Kilmartin will keep the focus on a side issue or two to avoid getting the full picture of what led to this maelstrom, which might cause embarrassment or maybe even criminal charges against current or former elected officials. Well, Gallison stepping down in scandal and Jackson being arrested, I'd say there's no good way to shock Rhode Islanders with political corruption. To get back to Rep. Serpa, she said that the Oversight Committee has been underutilized and should be the right hand of the Finance Committee. She sees this change as an opportunity to dig into government agencies that cause problems and see what the legislator can do to make things right. Well, when Karen McBeth, one of our favorite new Republicans, chaired the Oversight Committee, she did dig into the 38 Studios deal. She did everything she could to get focus on this issue. So how exactly do you plan to make the Oversight Committee overutilized, Rep. Serpa? I can tell you with complete confidence that sweeping potential corruption under the rug will not be the way to make things right. Are you kidding me?
Coming up, we have Johnathan WIlliams from the American Legislative Exchange Council, a Washington, D.C. agency that serves as a conduit for state legislators to exchange ideas. Rep. Pat Morgan and Mr. Williams talk in depth on the issues bubbling up out of this group. April and I will ask our oft-asked but seldom answered question, are you kidding me? Lastly, Jeff Richard fills us in on his thoughts regarding regional labor statistics.
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Johnathan WIlliams, who is coming to us from ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show. Good to be here in Rhode Island.
Coming up from Washington, D.C. to share some good information with us. Let's talk about ALEC first.
Sure.
Because I don't think a lot of people have ever even heard about it, right? Yeah. In your words, what does the American Legislative Exchange Council do? What's its purpose?
Yeah, you're right, Representative. A lot of people don't know what ALEC is. We are an organization dedicated to really the common sense American principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism. And we work as a cooperation between state lawmakers such as yourself, and thank you for your service as Rhode Island State Chair for ALEC, and also members of the business community to come together with solutions for the economic problems facing the states today. And we take this idea that states are laboratories of democracy, right, and that we can learn best practices from what works in some states and hopefully replicate those and then avoid the mistakes of what doesn't work in other states.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I am involved in it is because, you know, we have a very hostile business climate here. Mm-hmm. It's hurting Rhode Islanders. We lost an awful lot of jobs in 2008 and 2009, and we haven't gained them all back yet. So a lot of Rhode Islanders, they've gotten jobs, but the jobs they got don't pay what the old ones did, and their kids are leaving because there's just no opportunity here. So I wanted to find out how to make Rhode Island stronger, how to get jobs in here and really improve our economy. And I've learned some really good things at some of the meetings. You know, we were just at a meeting and somebody said, explain to us what federalism means.
Yeah, I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
I really do. And unfortunately, the concept directly from our Constitution, from our 10th Amendment and our Bill of Rights has kind of been lost over the years. And many people, when they hear the term federalism, unfortunately think that it means a growth in the federal government control over things, when the founders meant that to be exactly the opposite in this American experiment that we have. And that is, the 10th Amendment says the power is not directly given to the federal government, or reserved for the states and the people of the states, and that there ought to be this decentralized type of government, the government that governs closest to the people, we think does the best job. It's more responsive to their needs, it's more transparent, more accountable, cares about the individual lives of citizens more than a far-off, distant government in Washington, D.C., and that's, I think, why the founders designed it that way.
Yeah, I think so, and I think people here in Rhode Island, we still have financial town meetings.
It's a great concept.
And people don't want to give up those town meetings because it is a way for citizens to get in there and actually vote on the budget if they're interested. So it really keeps the control close. I think it's why we don't want to have 4-year terms, we have 2-year terms. It's because it allows the people to check in from time to time. The federal government's been growing a lot lately.
Well, it's been horrible, right? For anybody that believes in common sense ideas of fiscal responsibility and lower taxes, it's been a long time since the federal government has really got their act together. I mean, nearly $20 trillion in national debt today. We see bills passed every single year to tweak the tax code here or there, but there hasn't been fundamental tax change in Washington since 1986. Nearly 30 years ago, in October, we'll celebrate that 30th anniversary of that. Not a good anniversary to celebrate.
No,
but meanwhile, the states and localities are taking much more action. I think that's pretty helpful, and it's healthy in the American democracy and that experiment to see those decisions made closest to the people.
Yeah, one of the things that is so good about the conferences that you have, it's a learning experience actually. It's just full of seminars and talking to other legislators, is to find out what other states are doing and some of the really good ideas that they're coming up with. I know Maine is one of our kind of close neighbors here, and they've done, I just talked with them about welfare reform. And, you know, a lot of folks say, oh, welfare reform hurts the poor. From their data, it did the opposite. The poor actually were able to get jobs and advance their lives. It's been really good for the poor.
Well, certainly.
It's improved. It's improved their income, not the other way around.
And that's the way it should be, right? And Governor LePage in Maine deserves a lot of credit, as well as the legislators in Maine for putting together that. And it's not an easy issue to talk about.
No.
Because on one hand, you want to make sure the truly needy are getting the help that they need, and that safety net to make sure, you know, the single mother out there that's struggling gets the help that they need. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that it doesn't become a crutch to make sure that people have economic opportunity and they're not locked into just being dependent on welfare for the long term. In a lot of states, we find that people are better off, for instance, staying home, not working, collecting the welfare and not earning money up to a very high level in some places. In Pennsylvania, for instance, when we looked at it, it was about $70,000 a year was the cutoff point. So if you made anything less than $70,000 a year, you're still better off not working. And, you know, when we give people the incentive not to work, basically when we pay people not to work, when we tax people that work, should we really be surprised when less people work, right? And we've got this problem with people not going to work.
What you reward or what you pay for, you get more of.
It's economics 101.
There you go,
really
exactly. $70,000 in Pennsylvania. Oh, that's actually more than the average family makes in Rhode Island.
Right. It's disturbing that we're basically keeping those people out of the labor market, keeping them away from earned success and going out and getting a job because we're giving them all the incentive not to do so.
Well, and you know, I think welfare reform is something that we have to look at, not to be hard-hearted.
Right.
But I think people get a sense of purpose and pride if they have a job. I don't think anybody on welfare doesn't want to work.
That's right.
If there's a good job for them there.
And they want their kids to grow up working and become successful. And, you know, there's the work by Arthur Brooks, for instance, talking about what makes people happy. And a lot of what makes people happy, as it turns out from the research, is this idea of earned success, that they're making something of themselves and they're going and growing and maybe starting a business or working and becoming successful and being able to provide for their kids and their grandkids and maybe leave something behind if they're lucky enough. And so I think there's a lot of research to back that up, not just from a dollars and cents perspective, but really from the morality of capitalism side to say, what is it that really makes people happy? It's earned success.
Yeah. Honestly, very good points you're making. And it is one of the things that we learn about when we go to your seminars and stuff. What have you done? Has it worked? Has it hurt people?
Right.
Has it not? Has it helped them? A lot of good things. I know at one conference I learned about Vivitrol, which is a drug addiction preventer. What is that? What do they call it? A rescue kind of program. It's brand new, but a lot of states are using it, and that's when I was talking to other legislators in other states, that's how I found out about it. it breaks the addiction cycle for about better than 50% of the people who do it. They're using it in prisons to help people get out and lead better lives, not have to go back to prison because they go right back to drugs.
That's right.
Really good things that are percolating there.
Well, absolutely. Our meetings are a great place of exchange, and you can take whatever you'd like back from them. Whatever was going to work in Rhode Island, now not everything that you hear would be applicable here, right?
No.
But you take whatever works best, whether it's criminal justice reform or privacy issues or tax reform, pensions. I know you've dealt a lot with that here in Rhode Island over the years, but that's a great example of how you're able to bring something back, learn from what other states are doing, bring a real innovative private sector solution back, and really help the people of Rhode Island.
Sure. Let them make the mistakes and give us a better policy.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. We're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
If you hire a plumber to fix your pipes, do you expect him or her to know the craft? Yeah. In fact, you'd probably expect them to be licensed by the state. How about a lawyer? Same thing. How about if you went to court for something? Would you expect the judges and the staff to know what happens next? It turns out that in Rhode Island, the answer may be, not so much. Are you kidding me? Something must be wrong if that's the case. Well, I can't disagree, but let's look at the details. As reported by Catherine Gregg in the Providence Journal, former Senator Rhoda Perry will be back up on Smith Hill to sit before a Senate committee. The reason? She's been named to be clerk of the Superior Court for Washington County. I know. It is customary that the clerk be an attorney or at least a law school grad. Miss Perry is neither. For you or me, that would certainly mean an ugly interview with the Judiciary Committee. Perry, however, worked with all those folks for years while she was in office. It's said that she was a particular friend of Senate President Piva Weed. So, expect a love fest and quick approval from the whole Senate. By the way, the salary range for Rhoda Perry's new job is $69,000 to $74,000 per year. Return with us to those thrilling days of yesteryear, 2015 to be exact. The attempt to get former House member Don Lally's state pension pumped up by giving him a high-paying executive job for a couple of years failed. In that case, they were too eager, and he violated the timing of our revolving door requirements. In this case, Ms. Perry is almost certain to be our next clerk of court. Writing in the Ocean State Current's blog, Monique Chartier offered the opinion that while this transaction conforms to state law, it's still ethically corrupt. If your case in court is one of those that gets filed incorrectly, or for which suspense dates for your action are ignored, you'll suddenly start to think so too. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense Rhode Island. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Johnathan WIlliams, who is a director. Is that your official title?
Vice President of the Center for State Fiscal Reform at ALEC, yeah.
Okay, a director at ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Johnathan, there's been a lot of kind of pushback on ALEC because you actually take corporate donations. There is another group that we have at the state capitol. It's called NCLS, National Council of Legislative something or other. We actually take taxpayer dollars, and a lot of them, and give to that organization. And that's also a place where legislators come together and talk. ALEC is independent. You don't ask for any taxpayer money, correct?
That's right.
All right. But it still takes money to run the organization. So most of your dollars come from corporations?
Well, it's a broad group. I mean, everything from the person who sends us a $5 bill in the mail, and there's lots of folks out there across the country who just believe in our mission of free markets, limited government, and federalism that are doing that, to think tanks, to trade associations, to companies. And we have that broad range of support, and legislators support ALEC as a member financially as well. And so it's a broad group of donors that we have, supporters of our mission, and we encourage everybody to come out and support ALEC, whether it's on the legislative side, on the business side, and we think that interaction between the private sector, the job creators out there, the innovators, the ones that are going to get us out of, hopefully, this economic downturn that we've been facing here in Rhode Island as well as areas across the country, and come together and talk about ideas on a nonpartisan basis. And that's really important. We encourage Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians, vegetarians, anybody that wants to come out to an ALEC meeting and participate. And it's not about us pushing an agenda on anyone. It's about us being the table where people come and bring their perspectives, because the perspectives here in Rhode Island are going to be much different than the perspectives in Texas or Washington State or my home state of Michigan.
Right. Yeah, and
but it's all coming together.
Some things
right?
will work there but not work here.
That's exactly
So
right.
it's kind of a smorgasbord. We can kind of pick and choose what we want to learn about. And I think it's just about learning about it and sharing ideas. Why do you suppose that there is such hostility to your mission? Because there has been hostility to it. It doesn't make sense to me, quite frankly. I think the United States grew strong and great based on free markets, based upon the idea that government that is small governs best. We actually threw out that other thing with there was a monarch who had all of the power, right? I think we threw that off a long time ago. But that free market where anybody can start a business and anybody can grow, right? Grow their lives, has been something that's uniquely American. I don't understand the hostility, quite frankly.
Well, you know, I don't either. I think it's misplaced, unfortunately. I think a lot of people have just been misinformed of what ALEC is all about. Because when people actually go to our website, alec.org, see all of our model policies are there for the world to see, to review, to see, you know, is this a good idea, is it not a good idea? All of our research, like the book Rich States, Poor States, that's free for download. All of our research that's out there. That's right, Rich States, Poor States is right here talking about economic competitiveness. But, you know, I think that the doubts about ALEC from some have generally been driven by ideology, unfortunately. Just people who don't like the idea of free markets, limited government, and federalism have a problem with ALEC. And unfortunately, they want to shut down debate sometimes. We want to encourage debate. We want all sides to come to the table, be represented, and let's talk amongst ourselves about what the best solutions are for America going forward.
Well, and let's talk about some of these model policies that you were talking about. They take a long time sometimes to develop, right? There's an awful lot of input and a lot of varying discussion, and can take years.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, there's so many different voices at the table, which is a healthy thing. That's what we want at ALEC, is all kinds of different viewpoints, all kinds of different perspectives. People's regions of the country matter. You know, different businesses, large, small businesses, think tanks, nonprofits, individuals are there talking about what good policy looks like. And we have those very robust debates, but nothing becomes an ALEC model policy before the legislators sign off on it and choose that this is something that they want to endorse. Many times, a model policy, it comes from another state that's already in statute, that's codified into law, to say this has actually been working very well in this state. Here are the results, here are the after effects, and here's what we can learn from that experience. And for instance, on some of the issues, you've heard presentations that it's awfully appealing to say this has actually worked and provided real positive results.
They give real data
right.
on how good it's been. And do you force people then to take it back to their states?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I mean, that's a misnomer, of course, but you know, we let people choose whatever they want to take. Maybe they take nothing back with them. We just want them to be exposed to these ideas, right? Because unfortunately, as you know, as a state lawmaker, many times, especially during session, it's very tough to keep track of what's going on in the other 49 states. But much of that information is very valuable and could mean the difference between better outcomes here for Rhode Island taxpayers or worse outcomes. Just if you know, let's say when GE left Connecticut this year because of high taxes, there were some huge outcomes,
that's right?
There's lessons to be learned from that.
That was hurtful to Connecticut. So let's talk about one of the policies that I think right now seems to be a real hot topic, and that ALEC is working on, and that's criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
Right? It is something that everybody is interested in because it's affecting every state and every community. I haven't honestly gone to those. So tell me a little bit about what's happening there in those those discussions in those study groups?
Well, it's a great discussion, and it's a really important topic, Gary, and it's something that is a very bipartisan topic, which I think is important. In fact, ALEC has been recently partnering with the National Caucus of Black Legislators, NBCSL, to provide solutions, for various problems, whether it's areas that ALEC members represent across states, areas that the NBCSL members represent. This is a big problem across the country. I think that the one kind of misnomer of this topic is, well, you just want to let people off for crimes that they've done, and that's not at all what the idea is.
No, but let me give you an example of what we did in Rhode Island. We've made it a felony if you're caught for the third time putting graffiti on a wall. I mean, a felony. That means prison time,
Big
right?
time, right.
For graffiti. Now, graffiti's really, really annoying.
Oh, absolutely.
It is. And I don't understand why kids do it, quite frankly. But do we want young people going to prison?
And maybe never being able to find a job again if you're in
There's
occupational
consequences.
licensing, for instance, any of the state-regulated industries. It disqualifies you right off the bat, even if it's a low-level, nonviolent offense. Unfortunately, these people's careers are severely damaged
They
going
can't go
forward.
in the military.
Right.
You're right. There's so many things they can't do.
And so it's a dollars and cents issue in one sense, because we're spending so much. I know Rhode Island spends a whole lot on corrections, and just incarceration costs are just massive. And so what Texas and some of the states that have been leaders on this have found is they save millions and millions of taxpayer dollars when you can start to reduce those nonviolent prison sentences, for instance, and find out other ways to kind of remediate the situation that don't cost taxpayers money. But it also gets back to the individual. And what about these people's lives? They're nonviolent offenders, people that should not be put away for long periods of hard time, and they shouldn't be prohibited from ever getting a job once they get out. It creates
Right.
this cycle of crime going forward again, because what's their other option if there's no jobs available?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a model policy, folks. It's really people getting together and talking through all the sides of that issue and trying to come up with a common sense solution.
We're all about common sense, just like you are.
There you go. That's right. And we're going to take a break and ask, are you kidding me?
After weeks of legislative scandals, it looks like some of our highest officials, House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello and Senate President Teresa Paiva-Weed, are the frontrunners for a bill to restore the Ethics Commission scrutiny over state lawmakers. With exceptions, of course. Because it can't possibly be that simple. Are you kidding me? And I thought we were on the verge of turning a corner in Rhode Island politics. The Ethics Commission is the absolute best course for Rhode Island and to end this wave of scandal, corruption, greed, arrests, resignations. Well, yeah, you see where I'm going. I applaud the House Speaker and Senate President for being at the forefront of a bill that would restore Ethics Commission scrutiny over state lawmakers. There's just one aspect of their bill I'm not quite feeling. This legislation would shield all state and local candidates, including those seeking re-election, from potentially headline-making ethics complaints during the height of the election season. But that's when we need the most transparency about our potential lawmakers. I get that we don't want to see gratuitous headlines about candidates and smear campaigns or frivolous ethics complaints. What I'm having a hard time understanding is what exactly a frivolous ethics complaint is. I'm racking my brain here. I just guess I don't know what could be reported, assuming it's not reported with extreme exaggeration in an attempt to sell newspapers. Not that ever happens. I don't even know why I'm mentioning it. And if there is any time that the public should be aware of ethics complaints against prospective lawmakers, it should be before they elect them to office, or before they re-elect them, or pretty much any time before the state police raid their homes. The exemption for candidates would begin the day their person announces their candidacy and ends after the election. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that means between the end of June to the beginning of November. That would be around 5 months where the Ethics Commission can't touch you. But plenty of candidates announce runs before that, especially, I would assume, if primaries are involved. So for funsies, let's say half a year. The Ethics Commission can only investigate for half a year in some select circumstances. Why are you putting exemptions on ethics oversight? I don't want to see good people slandered or libeled, depending on the medium, of course, but if someone has an ethics violation, we deserve to know. The voting public reserves the right to decide if it is a violation worth considering and whether or not that candidate is still worth voting for. The legislators don't get to tell us how to vote. The press does not get to tell us how to vote. And if we don't have all of the necessary information at our disposal, then you have taken away the voters' confidence in the system. Let's not assume the worst of our press. I know by now you probably think I'm idealistic, and I am. But I'm confident in my own brain power to see through glamorous headlines and to take in all of the information I can before I head to the voting booth. I am a Rhode Island voter. I want to be aware if candidates for election or re-election have ethics complaints against them. I don't want an exemption that says who the Ethics Commission can investigate and who they can't. It's just the legislators pretending to give me what I want, which is full transparency of a public figure, but really shielding themselves because they don't want to suffer any embarrassments. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we've been talking with Johnathan WIlliams, who is a director with ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. And you've done a study.
We have the 9th edition of Rich States, Poor States, which is a book that we put together every year with Arthur Laffer, who is Ronald Reagan's, one of his economic advisors, and Stephen Moore from the Wall Street Journal and the Heritage Foundation. And we put it together to rank the states basically on economic competitiveness. We call it Rich States, Poor States, and we wanted to give policymakers as well as the general public a good, I guess, guide, a barometer to how their state stacks up versus the other 49. And we look at things like taxes and regulation and labor policy, and we chose these 15 factors for a couple of reasons. One is they matter for economic growth. We know this from not just anecdotally talking to small businesses and others as we go around, but based on the academic evidence, we know that these factors matter. But secondly, we chose the factors because they're factors that people like you as a state policymaker can control. Because thousands of things matter for why some states grow and why some states don't. Many of those are not related to policy, and things like weather and family connections and deep water ports and mountains for skiing and tourism and things like that. So take out the things that you can't control and focus on the things that you can, and that's why we came up with these factors. And we rank the states 1 through 50 every year and how they do in an economic outlook ranking is what we call it.
Okay, so you're basing your ratings on policies that government controls.
That's right.
And then you say which ones have it and which ones don't, and as a result, which ones are poorer?
That's right. Which ones have
And
a
which
better
ones are
economic
richer?
outlook and which ones don't in
Which
terms
ones
of future
have,
growth?
a better environment for their citizens to get jobs and move their lives forward?
That's right. It's basically, think about it almost in an opportunity index. You know, who has the best economic opportunity for future growth and innovation and job creation in those states?
And we certainly need opportunities here.
Well, you do, yeah.
Yeah.
Rhode Island does not come out #1 in this index. It's
No.
probably not a big surprise to you or your viewers. Rhode Island comes in, unfortunately, in the mid-30s. So, while not maybe as poorly as some people would
It's
think.
been climbing up.
You have been making some improvements, as you know. New York comes in 50th out of 50. And many of the northeastern New England states do come in that bottom 10. For instance, New Jersey's 48th, Vermont's 49th, Connecticut is up there at 47th as well. And so you do see somewhat of a trend of many New England states really struggling in the Outlook Index. And I think that generally has to do with generally high taxes, plentiful regulations, poor labor policies in many cases.
That's right, and those are the things that really prevent companies from coming and growing and making jobs. One of the things, you know, we were just talking, and I go door to door a lot, so I talk to my constituents, and one of the laments for so many folks is that kids are graduating from school and they're leaving because there's no opportunities here. And nobody wants to see their kids go to to a distant state and start their lives there, because they never come back once they go.
Well, that's right. And it's all about economic opportunity, creating the opportunities here in Rhode Island to get those people to stay, those kids when they graduate to stay. Because when you think about it from a dollars and cents perspective, you've spent how much per pupil, K-12, and then higher education, maybe they've got a great degree at Brown or the other universities here.
URI.
You're educating Texas and Florida's workforce, right?
Yeah,
You don't have
and the Carolinas. A lot of them are going to the Carolinas from here. One of the really, I think, troubling data points that I've learned is that we're losing citizens in the 25 to 45-year-old range. Well, that's their most productive work years, right? And they're mobile then, and they can't find good jobs here, so they're leaving. But think about, you're losing all of that education.
Yep.
You're losing their initiative, their abilities. Our state becomes poorer when you lose that cohort of people.
Yeah, and that's certainly one of the things we measure in the study is just how much Americans, as we say, are voting with their feet from one state to another. We find that taxes have a big factor. Economic opportunity is a big reason. It's in fact the #1 reason why people move from one state to another. And coming from Michigan, in my experience, we suffered the very same problems. Many, many years of outmigration of some of our most talented, promising young people when they graduated from college and university and maybe two-year colleges and even K-12 institutions, right? And they went and became other states' workforces. And so, one of the things we examine in rich states, poor states is how do you turn that trend around, right?
Well,
how
let me
do you
just
bring
ask
back-
you, mentioned Michigan. How did it rank on your scale 8-9 years ago when you first started?
Horribly, right? And so under the years of Jennifer Granholm, when she was governor, she kind of governed with high taxes on everybody and then special crony favorites for special few kind of businesses and ribbon cutting ceremonies with the businesses that she would say, I just created 10 jobs and look what I did because I'm the government kind of central planner.
So tax the bejesus out of your citizens so you can give the money to your
special
friends.
Favorites. And then you can be the one that's creating jobs. And that's the problem
you
when
get
you put...
the photo op.
Right, you get the photo op, you get the press release opportunity, ribbon cutting ceremony, and you get to say, look at me, I created this many jobs. The problem is, if she was creating 10 jobs, 100 jobs are leaving the state because of the poor business climate. And she tried a lot of different things. We had a Cool Cities initiative, similar to something that you may be familiar with.
We're cooler.
And that approach just didn't work in Michigan. Now, thankfully, Michigan is an optimistic story. And for a state like Rhode Island, I think there's some really good lessons to learn from Michigan, and that Michigan has begun to turn it around. It's not going to happen overnight.
No.
It was a 50-year
You had
problem.
Detroit.
Right?
Yeah.
We still have problems.
And you're still kind of churning through Detroit, but it's getting better too.
Yeah, we are starting. I think we've turned the corner under Governor Snyder and conservative free market group of the legislature. They made some big policy changes. They cut taxes significantly. In fact, one of the things that we always criticized Michigan for in rich states, poor states back 8-9 years ago when we started the report was it had the worst business tax structure in America on small businesses, on large businesses across the board. It was something that was really driving out jobs and growth. They fixed that. They went to a flat tax. And they also enacted things like right to work, which is a huge factor for why some states grow and why some states don't. That's why you've seen, I think, the resurgence of right to work across the Midwest and Indiana and Wisconsin and now West Virginia and Michigan, of course, as well. And so Michigan is a positive story to say if Michigan can turn it around,
we can do it
you
too.
can turn it around too.
We can do it too. So just because you mentioned it, you said right to work was one of the policies that they have changed in Michigan, which is a huge union state. Does that mean you got rid of unions there?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. In fact, we've made Michigan a more competitive state, which over time is going to grow private sector jobs, which if the unions are providing value for those private sector employees, the unions will do very well, the private sector unions, because we're going to be growing manufacturing again in Michigan instead of shipping all those jobs to other states, especially down south, because there's a reason why the South has been such a hotbed for economic growth, and a lot of auto manufacturing, a lot of foreign companies have set up shop in the South, and a lot of the things you hear from them is, hey, the costs are lower, labor costs are lower, but also it's things like right to work and taxes. Michigan just wasn't competitive for when those companies came to America. Now they are, I think.
Okay, so the right to work doesn't get rid of unions.
Not at all.
They exist right alongside. What, it's a right to work anywhere you want. Is that what it means?
That's right. It means as an employee, you have the option of joining a union or not. You can't be told as a condition of employment you must join a union. That's a non-right to work state like Rhode Island, where if you're there and you could be compelled to join a union whether you like to or not. That just seems to me as anti-American to force somebody to do something they don't want to do. But you look at it and you look at the states that have enacted right to work, and they have grown private sector jobs, and even some of the union officials in those states have admitted to say, hey, if we do our job and we show the value of what we would provide for these employees as unions, we're going to do fine, and these laws actually might help us. We've seen some of those quotes coming out of union officials in right-to-work states. It's really remarkable because it gets painted as an anti-union law, but at the end of the day, it's certainly not. It's a pro-worker freedom law.
Okay, I mean, that's good to know, and it has data that proves it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, listen, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
If you're like me, you think it's bad enough that the state makes its taxpayers pay for every harebrained scheme it comes up with without so much as asking us first. Yes, I'm talking to you, cooler and warmer. But then the burden tax taxpayers must feel particularly festive when they also make us pay for all their screw-ups in implementing those Kookadoo initiatives. Are you kidding me? It seems that the cooler and warmer debacle is the gift that keeps on taking. Previously on Common Sense, we've detailed the timeline of that ill-fated tourism ad campaign. Testimony before legislative committees clearly shows that the logo, the tagline, and the substantial amount of focus group research had already been completed before Betsy Wall even became a Rhode Island employee last December. In March, when the public launch of the campaign went so awry, the plan was quickly abandoned and Miss Wall was served up as proof positive that there would be consequences to poor performance. But of course, the program was fully developed and planned before she even arrived. So a cynic, such as myself, is left to assume that the consequences of poor performance in this case were that Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor was given no choice but to fire one of the blondes on his staff. Oh, I hate that when it happens. But wait, you didn't really think that was the end of the story, did you? Of course not. Last week, Projo's Kate Bramson had to use a Freedom of Information Act request to wrestle a copy of Betsy Wall's severance agreement away from Mr. Pryor. And what to her wondering eyes did appear? Why, a $67,500 severance payment plus a $500 bonus for providing her own health care for the 30 days she was among us. Sweet. Well, sweet for her anyway. For Secretary Pryor, it was a gift wrapped in hush money, so he didn't have to contend with a well-deserved personal lawsuit at the hands of the aggrieved marketer. But for you and me, what's the opposite of sweet? Bitter? The Department of Commerce was created by this administration out of whole cloth. After this year's budget was set, the department added nearly $500,000 worth of unforecast new payroll. Since all of it was for executive positions, I once again cynically assume it all came with similarly sweet, bitter severance promises. Where's all that money going to come from, you ask? I know, from your hide and mine. Didn't I mention that this is Rhode Island? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Johnathan WIlliams from the American Legislative Exchange Council. And we've been talking about rich states, poor states, which is the study that you did, an index, which kind of takes policies that elected officials are able to affect, right?
Yep.
So it looks at the policies and it says which ones are hurting us and which ones are helping. And depending on what states have the more good ones, they're richer. Their people are richer. And the ones that have the most bad ones are poorer.
Yeah, and you know, my co-author Art Laffer says it great, and he says, this isn't rocket surgery, as he likes to say. This is pretty simple. It's economics 101. It's really math, right? What makes a state a more competitive state? It's having the highest standard of living at the lowest cost of living.
Yeah.
And we look at those policies that really make a difference in that regard.
All right. So let's talk about estate taxes. A lot of us call those the death taxes,
The death tax, yeah.
because you die, not something everybody is looking forward to. And everything that you've earned over your lifetime is taxed. You were telling a story about a billionaire in New Jersey.
Yeah, you know, by reports, he was the wealthiest man in New Jersey. His name is David Tepper. He's a hedge fund billionaire, and he recently decided to pick up and move. And as we were talking about, vote with his feet, go to someplace else more favorable. He happened to choose Florida, which not only is nicer in the winter with the beaches, but it also has a couple of other attributes. One, it's a no personal income tax state on wage income. There are 9 of those states across the country. We follow that closely in rich states, poor states, and we find that's a big factor in terms of enhancing economic opportunity, certainly for somebody like David Tepper.
Sure.
But secondly, the death tax, as you talked about. No death tax in Florida, but New Jersey has some of the highest in the country. So he's going to save a whole lot of money by moving. Unfortunately, what are the ramifications, though? That's the second order effect that a lot of people don't talk about, in that in the first few months after David Tepper left, the government officials in New Jersey are already reporting that there's going to be a huge revenue hit to the budget because he left. He just picked up and left, right?
And he's not paying income taxes, he's not paying sales taxes, he's not paying property taxes.
Yeah.
He's gone, and all of the money that he was giving to government went with him.
Yeah, you can have a huge tax rate, let's say 10%, but what's 10% of nothing, right?
That's it.
Because when he left, you're going to get absolutely nothing, and states can't build walls to keep people in,
No.
right? That's one of their key lessons, is just how mobile Americans, especially businesses, are across states, because it's very similar to do business in Florida as it is in other U.S. states. It's not like you have to renounce your citizenship or anything to do the inversions that we've been seeing on TV with Pfizer and Burger King and a lot of these big companies.
Sure.
It's very simple. We've had decades of these really domestic inversions that we've been seeing. And the other effect is he's going to take his charitable contributions with him,
I was going to
too.
mention that. I bet he was a philanthropist because he had the
Absolutely.
money to give to charities, to the food banks and the American Cancer Society or whatever was his local charities.
That's right.
And they're gone.
That's right. So the Boys and Girls Club of Florida is going to get his donation instead of the Boys and Girls Club in New Jersey. And that's one of the things at ALEC that we've studied, is just how much taxes hurt charitable giving. And it's because of things like this, is that people give more when they have more in terms of disposable income, but when people leave, they're going to take their charitable contributions with them. And so it's really another damaging effect of high taxes. And when you look at death taxes, for instance, some of the least popular forms of taxes, when you poll the American public, gas taxes and tolls, that I know that you've fought those here
Yes,
for
I
a very
have.
long time, and then property taxes and death taxes. Those are the three least popular taxes among the
And they
American
should
people,
be.
and for good reason.
Yeah, for good reason. I know here in Rhode Island, actually, we have had wealthy folks leaving. And again, Florida's nice, but they grew up here in Rhode Island. They would stay if they could.
That's right.
Right? We've made it too hard for them to stay in Rhode Island.
That's right.
So they leave, and they do leave. A hole is created when they take their wealth, their taxes, their charitable giving with them.
And their influence within their communities, right?
And their talents.
That's right. Their innovation,
Yeah.
their talents, I mean, all those things that you can't measure apart from the dollars and cents. But I think why Americans don't like death taxes is it's not just because they don't raise a lot of money in the grand scheme of things for the budget.
They really
it's
don't.
a tiny percentage
Yeah,
of Rhode
it's
Island
about
budget, or the
$25
federal
million.
budget. So
Yeah.
it's insignificant in terms of any programs to support. But why they don't like it, it's an immoral tax. These people have been taxed on that same income several times throughout their lives, and now as they die, they're asking their loved ones to pay the tax man once again, and in many cases liquidate businesses to pay the tax bill.
Yes.
Family businesses.
That's it. And then it weakens that business, and the business goes under.
Yeah.
So there goes jobs again. So death tax, one of the things that you look at in here. You also look at cronyism. That's
Yes.
been in the news here in Rhode Island recently.
And you've been fighting it.
And I've
for
been
a very
fighting
long
it
time.
for a very long time, for a decade. Tell me what around cronyism, how do you measure it and how do you look at it? It's usually hidden from sight, but it's there.
That's a very good point in terms of cronyism. Is the first hurdle is we need more government spending transparency. That's
Oh,
something
transparency.
that ALEC
We've been
has worked
talking
on
about that
for
too.
years.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of our model policies is on the books. It calls for a state budget transparency website for anyone to come in and search and find the spending areas, find areas of cronyism. We in fact modeled this after the federal law that was authored by none other than Senator Barack Obama at the time, and took that idea in ALEC model policy format and brought it to the states for this model policy for spending transparency. We find that transparency is key to uncover cronyism. But then, how do you measure it? It's basically when government gets in the business of picking winners and losers, and instead of having everyone play by the same rules and treating everyone equally, when you start to create divisions within the tax code, especially, we look at subsidies, but we also look at tax carve-outs. We call it tax cronyism. And that is when one company or one industry gets special treatment over another. And now it's very complicated because many times industries will get special treatment because it's making up for a bad tax policy somewhere else to try to equalize the playing field. Our view is flatten the tax out, let everybody play by the same rules, and get rid of all this complexity, because that's the thing, is cronyism breeds tax complexity. And it wasn't too many weeks ago
And on an
that everyone
unfair
just filed
playing
their
field.
taxes. Well, right, on an unfair playing field, and everyone just filed their taxes, and you realize how complex the system can be, especially if you're a small business owner. But what breeds that is tax cronyism, and it creates an unfair playing field where a lot of times it's not the small businesses that are getting the benefits either. The people who are the innovators, the startups, the job creators, they're not the ones qualifying for these special deals. And so that's something we've been very vigilant at, tracking across the states and trying to put an end to this business of cronyism in the tax code.
And it's crony capitalism, it's cronyism anywhere.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I've really struggled with, I'm so glad there's a model policy on transparency, because as a legislator, I have been struggling with this administration over transparency issues, as has the media. I'm an elected official. I have to hand in an official access to public records request to get information, and then they just label everything an internal document or preliminary so that I won't get it anyway. It's just been, I'd want to see that model policy.
Oh, absolutely. It's on the site,
that model policy.
It's something that, I think it breeds distrust of government from the average person in Rhode Island to say, hey, if even Representative Morgan doesn't have access to the things that she needs to have access to as an elected representative of ours, how can we as average, everyday taxpayers across the state be expected to understand what's going on in state government?
Yeah, exactly. We need the tools to see what our government is doing. And I know there's more, but we're really at the end of our time. So I'm just going to take a moment to kind of summarize. This is a really good book.
Well, thank you.
Because it helps me as a legislator and my colleagues kind of figure out what we're doing right in Rhode Island and what we're doing wrong. We have made some good moves lately.
That's right.
We're moving up the scale, but we need to make a whole lot more because Rhode Islanders are struggling right now. And the things that ALEC is doing, giving us information and data and model policies, will help us make Rhode Island stronger. So thank you very much for your work.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all work here on behalf of taxpayers of Rhode Island.
Thank you. I hope to have you back soon.
I'd love to.
Okay.
When you reside in a very small state, what happens in the surrounding territories is very important. The neighbors will either have an advantage or have to give up something as laws are enacted that change human behavior as most laws are meant to do. Things like gas tax, income taxes, sales taxes, excise taxes, car taxes. I may have missed a few, but as far as I know, Rhode Island has every tax and fee that has ever been thought up. I thought I would spend a few minutes this week looking at some of the consequences of being sandwiched in by Massachusetts and Connecticut. I started with some numbers from that good government entity, the Department of Labor, specifically its Bureau of Labor Statistics. Thousands of well-paid government employees toil endlessly in Boston to keep an eye on the region's labor statistics. Staying with current numbers, I looked first at March 2015 to March 2016 labor force stats for Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Mass. How many people are we talking about? Well, Rhode Island employed 555,600 folks in March of 2015, going to 552,100 in March of 2016. Now that's down 0.5%. Okay, how did they do in Massachusetts? 3,586,800 working in 2015, 3,581,500 in 2016, down a mere 0.1%. Connecticut went from 1,898,600 to 1,901,900, a 0.2% rise. Atta go, Connecticut. More is always better. When I looked at the official unemployment numbers, it showed Rhode Island at 35,200 in 2015 and 29,900 in 2016. That's good, as it reflects a 15.1% improvement. How did the other guys do? Well, Connecticut improved by 4.4% and Massachusetts by a whopping 25.8%. They must be doing something right in Boston. The U.S. unemployment rate over that year went from 5.5 to 5.0. In New England, it went from 5.2 to 4.5. But in Rhode Island, we went from 6.3 to 5.4. Not good compared to New England. Now, feeling a little despondent, I decided to see what was happening in the Rhode Island border towns as far as the size of the labor force and unemployment was concerned. I thought I would be able to get a glimpse of life at the border. So I looked at who lived where and where they worked. We'll start with Westerly. There were 3,507 workers living in Westerly, but working in Connecticut. That number represents 31.9% of the 11,258 Westerly workforce, who are now paying Connecticut's income taxes. How about the other way? Well, living in Connecticut, working in Westerly were 1,664 folks. That's 16.32%. So the message is lots fewer dollars are flowing into Rhode Island than Connecticut sees from us. Lest you think Westerly is unusual, I looked at Cumberland. They had a 26.6% out and a 12.2% in ratio. Foster's 2809 workers had a 6.7% out and a 1.8% in. Hopkinton lost 970 workers to Connecticut and gained only 146 Connecticut folks. That is 20.6% to 9.7%. What a difference. So it went, town to border town. Then you need to consider what the folks are doing for the 8 to 10 hours a day that they are not in Rhode Island. They go out for lunch, buy gas, get the dry cleaning, stop at Dunkin' Donuts, shop for socks, and on it goes. I will bet my next Social Security check, not very much, that every one of those folks takes advantage of the less expensive stuff in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Okay, so what should we be doing to help the situation? We can't change the state's geography, but there's a lot of other things we could do. How about jobs? We would like to be viewed as a business-friendly state. Since we are now at the bottom of that comparative statistic, we have to do something real and obvious. First step, vote in honest folks who can change the political culture. The Projo actually had some suggestions on the editorial page recently that I wholeheartedly support. Things like line item veto, ethics reform, ending legislative grants. I also like voter initiative and recall. Wouldn't that be peachy? We really have to do something dramatic or stay in free fall. Thank you for watching, and God bless.